Chapter 19 of Zhang Henshui is a family of golden fens, the first discussion about the good date. Let's talk about it off the screen, and I received a generous favor and relieved my worries in the white armor. When Yanxi arrived at Luohua Hutong, it was already sunset. Because I was walking in the yard, I walked over to Leng Zhai. Mrs. Leng and Leng Qingqiu each took a wicker chair to enjoy the coolness in the goldfish tank. When they saw Yanxi coming, they both stood up. Yanxi said, "It's this time. Why hasn't Mr. Song come back yet?" Mrs. Leng said, "Thanks to your kindness, I recommended a restaurant for him, so I'm a little busy. Besides, he likes to drink drinks, so maybe this time will come again." Went drinking somewhere. When Mother Han saw Yanxi coming, she had already brought him a wicker chair and asked him to sit down. Yanxi saw that Qingqiu had changed her hair to a loose braid and was wearing a white gauze short coat, which reflected the water-red shirt underneath. She held a white silk round fan with light edges in her hand, shaking it every now and then. Looking at her back, she became more and more delicate. It happened that Mrs. Leng was busy and left by chance. Yanxi looked at her and smiled slightly, and said softly, "Why did you suddenly change it now?" Qingqiu chewed on the edge of the fan and only glanced at Yanxi without saying anything. Yanxi said, "Are you okay tonight? Let's go watch an outdoor movie together, okay?" Qingqiu looked into the room above and saw that her mother had not come out yet, so she smiled and said, "You invite my mother, and I will go." Yanxi said, "The old man doesn't like to watch movies, so don't invite her." Qingqiu said, "If not, just say you don't want to invite her. But if you don't invite her, I can't tell her." Yanxi said, "I have an idea. I'll tell you that I have a movie ticket. If I can't go there, I'll give it to you. Then you can go alone. You go first, and then we can meet on the roof of the cinema. Do you like it?" Qingqiu said, "I don't do such sneaky things, hiding it from my mother." When Yanxi was about to say something else, Mrs. Leng came out again. Yanxi asked, "Auntie, do you want to watch a movie?" Mrs. Leng said with a smile, "It's just a bad show. I don't like watching movies. Because the shadows are flickering and dazzling, I really don't like it. Zidao, I have a movie ticket here for tonight. If I don't go tonight, it will expire. I can't go myself, so if I leave it at home, it will be thrown away in vain. I would like to be a favor, please. Let's go, but my aunt doesn't like watching movies." Mrs. Leng smiled and said, "There is no reason to throw it away. Please give it to me. I will use it." Then she smiled and said to Qingqiu, "Take it and watch it, okay?" Qingqiu said, "I won't go alone." Mrs. Leng said, "What's the big deal? I'll go play alone." Yanxi said, "You can go. When it's time to leave, I'll call a car. Go pick up Miss Leng, okay?" Mrs. Leng said, "No need, just hire a car and come back." Yanxi said, then walked over to her side and tore up a piece of the movie ticket book she bought. After taking it, he handed it to Qingqiu and said, "It's a pity that I only have one. If there were two, even my aunt could invite me." Qingqiu held the ticket with a fan and smiled. Yanxi said, "Today's film is very good. You are right to go." They started the show at 9 o'clock, and it is only about 7 o'clock now. It's just right to go after dinner. Mrs. Leng said, "In this case, let's eat quickly without delaying you." Yanxi chatted a few more words and walked away. Qingqiu had dinner here, changed clothes calmly, and then hired a car to come to the cinema. Yanxi was more impatient than she was. After returning home, she took a car and came to the cinema first. At this time, the sun was setting and the heat was beginning to end. Various bonsais on the roof garden were newly sprinkled with water. The green leaves were lush and there was a faint fragrance. Yanxi picked a seat on the high platform behind and sat down, brewing a pot. Sipping tea in the wind, quietly waiting for the autumn. After a while, Qingqiu actually walked up to the roof. As soon as she got on the escalator, she turned around and looked around. Yanxi hurriedly waved, "Here, here." Qingqiu came over and sat across from Yanxi. He smiled and said, "There aren't many people here yet. It's early." Yanxi said, "We didn't care about watching movies, we just wanted to talk in this place." As he said this, Yanxi poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of Qingqiu. He also peeled off 2 small packets of tangerine peel plums on the plate and brought them over. Qingqiu smiled and asked, "Why are you so polite?" Yanxi said, "We are still to families now. To respect women's rights, of course I have to be more polite. In the future, when you come to the house, if you want to be rude, that's up to you. Or a little bit. I won't be polite if you bother me about a trivial matter. Qingqiu picked up the cup, sipped the tea slowly, and looked at Yanxi with a smile. Yanxi said, "What are you laughing at? Is what I said wrong?" Qingqiu said with a smile, "Yes, you are right, but it's a pity that you said it too early. Listening to your words, it seems that you are ready to take care of me." Yanxi smiled. He said, "That's what you said. What I mean is, no one should care about anyone." Qingqiu said with a smile, "Didn't you say that? Your brothers are a little afraid of my sister-in-law." Yanxi said with a smile, "According to you, so, I should learn from my brother?" Qingqiu said, "I didn't ask you to learn from my brother. You told me so yourself. That means there is no difference between brothers." Yanxi, he smiled and said, "If you talk in roundabout ways like this, I really don't think you can win. I won't talk to you about this anymore. I ask you, why did you wear braids today?" Qingqiu said, "Because I washed my hair and braided my hair. It's good to dry your hair. You are really nosy." Yanxi said, "It seems that you haven't washed your hair for a few days. How can you wash your hair again?" Qingqiu said, "It's such a hot day when your head is sweating day and night. How can you still do it? How many days?" Yanxi said with a smile, "I feel embarrassed for you." Qingqiu said, "Why are you embarrassed?" Yanxi said with a smile, "For the sake of beauty, your dark hair can better bring out the tenderness and whiteness of your skin, so I suggest you keep it. If you wash it every few days and are exposed to heat and hot weather, I suggest you cut it off." Qingqiu said, "Do you also advocate that I cut it off?" Yanxi said with a smile, "I can't say that I absolutely advocate cutting it off. I think it's okay to keep it or not." Qingqiu said, "What kind of bodhisattva talk are you talking about? How can there be a good thing on both sides?" Yanxi said, "I have already said that. How is it a bodhisattva?" Qingqiu said, "Do you think hair cutting is not good? Some of them look good, but some don't." Qingqiu smiled and said, "From what you said, I probably didn't look good." Yanxi said, "That's not what I said. I thought if you did, it's a pity." Qingqiu said, "What's the pity? It's not like I lost something." Yanxi smiled and said, "It's something long and thin with natural beauty. It took 10 or 20 years to accumulate it. It's only like this. Now it's a pity to cut it off with scissors." Qingqiu said, "According to you, it's just for looking good. It's just for others, but it will be a lot more convenient for you." Yanxi said, "You really want to cut it, and I agree with it, but your mother won't agree to it, right?" Qingqiu said, "Maybe if you tell her, she will agree. I really want to cut it off, but it won't work if she doesn't agree." Yanxi said, "I want to see how your perseverance is doing. If you succeed in this matter, we can openly deal with it." Your mother said, "Don't worry, it won't be a problem for me. I still need you to go back and go through your big family." Yanxi said, "It won't be a problem for me as long as your mother agrees. You can explain it to my father." Qingqiu said, "I said it's not a problem for me, and you said it's not a problem for everyone. Just keep silent and let it pass." Yanxi smiled. "How long will it take for you to graduate?" Qingqiu said, "There are still 2 semesters left." Yanxi said, "What I mean is that after you graduate, we can solve our problems. If it's too early, I won't be able to live in Luohuahutong and will move back home." Qingqiu smiled and said, "So this is your plan? But I graduated from high school, and I plan to go to college as an undergraduate, but the time is still far away." Yanxi said, "What else do you want to do after graduating from college? Like our family, do we still expect you to become a professor and earn $100 a month after graduation? Of course it's not necessary. When it comes to learning, my 5th and 6th sisters all came back from studying abroad. My 4th sister is still in Japan, and I haven't seen them do any big things. Are you just like me, either playing at home or playing outside? What use can you do with a full stomach of books?" Qingqiu said, "According to what you said, studying is useless. No matter who you are, you should play from childhood to old age. But to play this way, you have to be as rich as your family. If everyone follows your words, then no one will do anything in the world. If there is no one to eat, no one will farm, and no one will wear clothes, no one will weave. What kind of world will that be?" Yanxi said, "You misunderstood what I meant. I'm not saying that everyone in the world should play, but there is a group of women who only need to take care of the housekeeping and manage the small things of oil, salt, firewood, and rice. Why spend a lot of money to study such profound knowledge? Qingqiu said with a smile, according to what you said, I don't need to seek advanced knowledge. In the future, I will also be responsible for managing small matters such as oil, salt, firewood, and rice. Yanxi said, what I said is wrong, is it true? That's not what I meant, because my answer turned to the issue of reading. You keep asking me this sentence, and the more you talk, the more stiff I get. Qingqiu smiled when he saw Yanxi declare failure, and did not pursue further questions. At this time, the sky was gradually getting dark, and the bright stars in the sky, one in the east and one in the west, slowly appeared. People watching movies came in droves, and the guest seats were filled with men and women. Suddenly a very strong fragrance rushed towards me. Then someone called out Yanxi. When he looked back, it was Miss Wu who was standing next to the chair in a suit with bare back and breasts. Yanxi quickly stood up. She had already stretched out her hand. Yanxi could only hold her hand and said, we won't meet for a long time. Miss Wu said, are you the only one? Yanxi said, there is another person, friend. He introduced to Qingqiu. There is also this Miss Leng. When Qingqiu heard about it, he stood up and nodded to Miss Wu. Yanxi asked, who is Miss Wu here? Miss Wu said, I originally made an appointment with a friend to meet here, but he didn't come. There was an empty seat next to Yanxi. Miss Wu said, they sat down next to each other unceremoniously. Although Yanxi was very reluctant, she could not tell her not to sit down, and she was too embarrassed to walk away with Qingqiu, so she could only sit silently and wait for the movie to start. Miss Wu had never heard that Yanxi had a close friend named Leng, so she naturally didn't pay attention to it. However, she didn't expect to sit here and hinder her love talk. Not long after, the movie started. Yanxi and Qingqiu talked about the plot of the movie, and the more they talked, the more intimate they became. Eventually, the two of them became close friends, and they came together to talk, forgetting that there was Miss Wu next to them. At this time, Miss Wu suddenly realized when she saw the two of them in this situation. Sit aside, don't disturb him, and let them talk about their love. After a while, the movie took a break, the lights all around came on, and Miss Wu spoke to them. Because he asked Qingqiu, which school is Miss Leng studying in now? Qingqiu smiled and said, it's ridiculous, she is still in high school. Miss Wu said, where do you live now? Go to school to attend classes, no? Is it far away? Qingqiu said, not far away. I live in Luohuahutong, only a little way away. Miss Wu thought about it. The place name of Luohuahutong seemed familiar to her ears. Why does she live there? When Yanxi heard Qingqiu say the name of the place, she looked at her as if she was surprised. Seeing Yanxi like this, Qingqiu's expression changed. But Miss Wu was careful about this matter, and she became even more strange when she saw the two of them raising their eyebrows and talking to each other. At that time, I kept it in my heart, and kept silent, pretending not to notice. Until the movie ended, Miss Wu went downstairs first. Yanxi said to Qingqiu, there are all cars in the mess at the door. It's not easy to hire a car, so just take my car back. As he went downstairs, he saw the gorgeous female guests and the handsome male guests. Those who get on the car, get on the car. Those who get on the carriage, get on the carriage. Similar, there is also a human chartered car. He was so elegant, so he was dwarfed by hiring a car on the street. So he and Yanxi unknowingly got into the car together. The car arrived at the door of Leng's house first and stopped. Mother Han came out to open the door and saw Qingqiu coming in the same car as Yanxi. She said nothing and led Qingqiu in. At this time, Mrs. Leng was still enjoying the cool in the yard. When she saw Qingqiu coming in, she asked, did you come back in someone's car? Qingqiu only hummed an agreement and went into the room to change clothes. Mrs. Leng saw that she had not come out for a long time, so she shouted, it's so hot. Why are you staying in the house? Why don't you come out to enjoy the cool? Qingqiu said, I feel dizzy after watching the movie. I want to sleep. Mrs. Leng said, there is a bamboo bed outside. If you want to sleep, you can sleep outside. Why are you sleeping inside? Qingqiu was repeatedly urged by her mother and had to come outside. Mrs. Leng first chatted with her, and then asked her what movie she watched today. Was it good? Qingqiu said, the movie is not bad. It's a family movie. The main idea is to encourage families to live in harmony. Mrs. Leng said, no need to mention it. It must be about a man and a woman who make trouble for a while, and then get married. Qingqiu said, that's probably it. Mrs. Leng said, I just hate those foreign movies. They always hug each other and kiss. Qingqiu smiled and said, that's the custom in foreign countries. What's so strange about it? Mrs. Leng said, that's fine. Why do they always get married in the end? Qingqiu said, you are right to criticize me on this point. But according to the people who act in the movies, if there is no marriage, no one will watch it. Mrs. Leng said, do we Chinese also like to watch this kind of wedding? Qingqiu smiled and said, marriage doesn't appear in every movie. Even if there is, it's only in the last scene. Should we not watch it at all? Just for that little thing? Mrs. Leng said, we didn't have these new things when we were young. Even if we did, our superiors wouldn't let you see them. Now it's your turn. You are so lucky. You can enjoy the world of glamour as you please. Qingqiu laughed. How can watching a movie be considered as going to the world of glamour? And it was you who asked me to go. Mrs. Leng said, I'm not saying you shouldn't go. I'm saying only you can go. Qingqiu laughed. I hear you talking like you're complaining. Mrs. Leng said, what are you complaining about? As long as you don't have to worry about food and clothes, and you can go out to play often, I'm willing to do that. This brings us to the 7th young master of the Jin family. It's rare that he thinks highly of us. He sends us food and clothes, and finds a job for your uncle, so we can live a comfortable life. I think he means. Mrs. Leng couldn't continue talking here, and Qingqiu didn't want to reply. Everyone sat in silence for a while, and Mrs. Leng said, this is what you often tell me. Now, men and women socialize openly, and men and women make friends equally. So I also look at it from a broad perspective. It's not a big deal for men and women to make friends. But, when she said the word but, there was nothing else to say, so she just coughed twice to cover it up. Qingqiu waved her fan vigorously without saying anything. Mrs. Leng also slapped the mosquitoes on her legs with the fan in her hand, making a snapping sound. Everyone was silent for a while, and Qingqiu suddenly said to Mrs. Leng, Mom, it's so hot to braid your hair. Mrs. Leng didn't wait for her to finish, and said, you can comb your hair tomorrow. Qingqiu laughed and said, it's hot to braid your hair. Won't it be hot to comb your hair? Mrs. Leng said, then what can I do? Unless I shave my hair and become a nun, then I won't be hot. Qingqiu said, there are many people who cut hair now. Do you have to become a nun to cut your hair? Mom, I'll cut my hair too, okay? Mrs. Leng said, nonsense. Good hair growing on your head. How can it bother you? Qingqiu said, didn't I tell you that it's very hot? Mrs. Leng said, since, in the past, women didn't cut their hair, so how did they get through the hot weather? Qingqiu laughed and said, that's because people in the past didn't dare to break the habit and didn't know how to enjoy this blessing. Now that we have this good thing, we are the ones who get to take advantage. For example, in the past, there were no trains to travel by land, and no ships to travel by water. It was so inconvenient. Now that we have trains and ships, who wouldn't want to take them? Mrs. Leng said, it's just a few more cents, and you don't have to cut off a piece of flesh. How can you make an analogy? Qingqiu laughed and said, even if you can't make an analogy, men in the past had a braid behind their heads, which was very uncomfortable. Now they all cut their hair, which is convenient and comfortable. Looks good. Isn't that a proof? Mrs. Leng said, with a smile, you are getting more and more reasonable. But I think it doesn't look good for a woman to cut her hair. Qingqiu said, that's because you are not used to it. Once you are used to it, you won't think it's shabby anymore. Mrs. Leng said, if you really want to cut it, I can't help it, but be careful that your uncle will scold you. Qingqiu said, it's my own hair. I can cut it if I want to, and I can keep it if I want to. How can my uncle control it? Mrs. Leng said, as long as you are not afraid of his nagging, just go ahead and cut it. Qingqiu said, give him 4 taels of wine, and he won't ask even if the sky falls. Why should you be afraid of his nagging? Mrs. Leng said, it depends on you. It's settled, okay? I'll let you cut your hair yourself. I don't care. Qingqiu smiled and said, since you said you don't care, don't ask me anymore. Mrs. Leng said, do you really want to cut your hair? Qingqiu said, of course it's true. Mrs. Leng said, I never heard you say that before. Why did you suddenly mention this matter when you came back from the movie today? Qingqiu said, It's because I saw so many people getting their hair cut that I remembered it. Mrs. Leng said, when you came home just now, their car was waiting for you at the entrance of the cinema, wasn't it? Qingqiu and her mother were talking about the haircut issue, but unexpectedly they suddenly turned to the car. She thought, why did her mother pay attention to this matter again and again? She has always pretended to be confused about the matter between me and Yanxi, and didn't ask about it. Now she just wants to investigate it. What's her intention? Is she going to change her mind? While she was thinking like this, she didn't agree to this for a moment. Mrs. Leng saw that she was talking silently, and she became more suspicious. That night, she didn't say anything and went back to bed. The next morning, when Mrs. Leng woke up, she had an unhappy look on her face. Her brother Zhang Henshui, holding a cigarette in his mouth, slowly walked to the upper room and said to Mrs. Leng, I am short of 200 yuan now. It would be great if we could move some of it. Mrs. Leng said, after my second uncle got the job in the library, he should have more money. Why is he still starving? Zhang Henshui said, why? Have you forgotten about this? The old lady in the south wrote to us a long time ago, saying that she would give us 200 or 300 yuan for her 70th birthday this fall. Now that time is approaching, we have to find a way to do it. Yesterday was the birthday of an old lady of a director in the Yamen, and everyone chipped in. I was very worried about this. Not to mention 200 or 300 yuan, I don't think it's enough to get a few dozen yuan to get by. Mrs. Leng said, I have always forgotten about this. If you really can't get the money together, Qingqiu still has a few pieces of jewelry that can be exchanged, and we can always get some money together. Zhang Henshui said, will my niece agree? I think it's better not to mention this. I want to discuss with brother Yanxi and transfer 200 yuans. I will pay him back in the winter of the new year. Mrs. Leng said, he has helped us so much. It's embarrassing to ask him for help all the time. Besides, he is not related to us. It's not right to ask him all the time. Zhang Henshui said, it's very common for friends to exchange what they have. What's right or wrong? Mrs. Leng said, if you want to borrow money, go somewhere else. Don't ask the Jin family. Zhang Henshui saw that Mrs. Leng looked a little unhappy, so she didn't say anything. This day passed, and in the evening, Han Ma sent a few empty plates to Yanxi's place. It turned out that Yanxi sent snacks. Yanxi happened to be strolling in the yard. Seeing Han Ma, he stopped her and said, what are you busy with? It doesn't matter if you keep a few empty plates. Why do you have to send them over? Han Ma said, even if you send these things, our madam will still feel bad. How can you accept all the plates? Yanxi said, I haven't seen your young lady come out all day today. Did she go out early? Han Ma looked around and said in a low voice, the mother and daughter are angry. Yanxi said, what are you angry about? Is it because you came back late last night? Han Ma said, that's not what we talked about last night. It's not about that today. She repeated the story of Zhang Henshui wanting to borrow money, but Madame Leng refused and wanted to exchange it for Qingqiu jewelry. Yanxi smiled and said, is it about this? That's not difficult. It will be solved tomorrow. The next day, Yanxi took out his checkbook and asked Jin Rong to go to the bank to withdraw 300 yuans, and told him to pay the 300 yuans in cash. In less than an hour, Jin Rong had withdrawn the 300 yuans in cash. Yanxi called Han Ma over, handed her the 300 yuan, and said, tell Mrs. Leng that Mr. Song also mentioned that he was short of 200 or 300 yuan. I forgot about it because I was busy. Here are 300 yuan in cash. Please accept it. Han Ma said, my wife is embarrassed to borrow money from you. That's good. You take it out first. Yanxi said, it doesn't matter. Just ask your wife to accept it, and you can pay me back when you have some money. I'm not waiting for this money. When Han Ma saw the so much cash, how could she not take it? She said, I'll take it and try it out. If our wife doesn't want it, I'll take it back. As she spoke, she held 3 large bags of cash in her hands and walked straight into Mrs. Leng's room. She put them on the table with a smile and said, this thing is really heavy. Mrs. Leng asked, what's in it? Han Ma smiled and said, it's cash. Mrs. Leng said, you think I've been thinking about money these days, so you say it's money to tempt me? Han Ma said, if you don't believe me, I'll open it, and you'll see. As she spoke, she quickly opened a paper bag. She didn't hold it tightly, and a big hole appeared in the paper. With a rustling sound, the foreign money scattered all over the table. There were also more than a dozen yuan, which rolled to the ground with a jingling sound. Mrs. Leng said, "Hey, really? Where did you get so much money?" Han Ma smiled and said, "I can do magic. I heard that madam needed money, so I made this money." Mrs. Leng said, "Of course, this must have been borrowed by second uncle Qingqiu from next door." While picking up the money on the ground, Han Ma said, "The money is indeed young Master Jin's, but uncle didn't go to borrow it." After picking up the money, Han Ma counted the scattered 100 yuan in cash upside down. Mrs. Leng laughed and said, "You have never seen money before. You are a joke. This man is really loose-handed. He gave it to people before they even asked to borrow from him. Should I accept it or not?" Han Ma said, "Why not? Will money bite people's hands?" Mrs. Leng took the 2 unopened packages of foreign currency, weighed them, counted the open ones, was silent for a while, and said, "I will accept the money. You go and tell Master Jin, and tell uncle for now, that you only gave 200 yuans. I will raise the money to pay him back in the future." Han Ma said, "Just tell him not to tell uncle. Why beat around the bush?" Mrs. Leng said, "It's not good to hide it from him. He has no money, and will have to borrow from others." Mrs. Leng was naturally relieved after receiving the 300 yuans in cash, and the worries in her heart were relieved a lot. Qingqiu said, "Mom, now that I have some money, can I have my hair cut?" Mrs. Leng said, "This child talks very strangely. What does my having a haircut have to do with me?" Qingqiu smiled and said, "Aren't you always worried about me because you don't have money?" "Because you are worried, I am afraid that cutting my hair will make you angry, so I dare not do it." Mrs. Leng said, "I have said it before, I don't care. Why are you asking?" Han Ma said, "That's right. I heard Master Jin say that everyone in his family cuts their hair." Qingqiu said, "I cut my own hair. Whether his family cuts their hair or not is none of my business." Han Ma said, "That's what I said. Now, there are many ladies who get their hair cut." Mrs. Leng ignored her and said to Qingqiu, "You can get your hair cut, but don't cut it so that your head is bald. It's also ugly." Qingqiu smiled and said, "Didn't you say you don't care?" Mrs. Leng said, "I don't care, but if you cut your hair like a man and wear women's clothes, don't you think it will look bad?" Qingqiu said, "Of course, I won't make it look like that. There is a barber shop run by a foreigner in Beiyang. He cuts very well. Many of my classmates get their hair cut there." At this point, someone outside laughed and said, "Miss Leng, you are so rich that you still go to Beiyang to get your hair cut." As she spoke, 2 women walked in. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.